Before we start learning today's piece of Tanya, let's just do a little bit of a recap to get our bearings again. And then we'll learn, it's actually a very, very beautiful piece of Tanya. Not that any piece of Tanya is not beautiful. But on the one hand, the most important thing is the actual mitzvah. You do a mitzvah, that's what matters. You study Torah, that's what matters. You prayed, that's what matters. You do a mitzvah. But starting from last chapter, chapter 38, the author started introducing us to this idea that your Judaism needs a lift. Your Judaism needs to have a certain investment on your part, on our part, that uplifts it and allows it to shine. Which means like this. Every single mitzvah is really a packet of godliness. And it's the way that we bring godliness into our world, into our life. But then we also have a very important role in the mitzvah. Not just that we do the mitzvah, but that we activate the mitzvah. Are we allowing the godliness of this moment to shine? So it's very simple. There's a moment happening right now. What does this moment look like? Is this just another moment? Is this just another experience? That's just, another pedestrian moment, another mundane moment? Just like we have moments like that all the time in our world. I was driving my car today. I filled up my car with gas. Okay, that's just, that is an action, that is an experience of this world. Is your mitzvah the exact same thing? I filled up gas, I did a mitzvah. Now, of course, you can't compare. One's a godly act, and one is not a godly act. Filling up gas is not a godly act. But the question is, did you make that godly act into a godly experience? Did you infuse that mitzvah with the power that that moment deserves? We call that kavanah. Kavanah means your emotional investment, your emotional presence. What are you putting into this mitzvah? And this chapter, chapter 39, walked us through three different kinds of kavanahs and showed us how each of these three different kavanahs each one is a deeper way, a deeper form of bringing God into our life in this moment. An even deeper relationship, an even deeper experience. And that allows this mitzvah to now soar upward. That was the wording we used. It now becomes more spiritual than just something of this world. It's like it's a moment, it's an experience, it's an activity of another world. Because this is a moment where a relationship with God, the presence of God, shined here on this earth, shined here in a human being's life. So it could be a mitzvah that is, its energy goes up to the highest world. It's the highest experience of Atzilus. It could be from the world of Beriah. It could be the world of Yitzira. We're not going to go into all that again. So we learned this basic premise, and we walked through a different world and different kavanas and where they go. But now we're going to learn at the ending of the chapter what happens when a mitzvah is done with no kavana, zero kavana. Which is very relatable. You do a mitzvah, and it just happens to be that you felt nothing, you thought nothing, you just did it. Why'd you do it? So there's two possibilities. Either you did it with no kavanah, which means you could be a Jew, that you have a habit of always lighting Shabbat candles, which is beautiful. But because it's a habit, you also don't think about it much. Do you ever have that experience before? It becomes so habitual that you don't even process it. That's called no kavanah. Zero emotional presence, zero emotional investment. Which creates a very strong detachment from the mitzvah. What happens then? And then there's an even lower form of a mitzvah. What happens if you do a mitzvah but with a bad kavanah, a bad intent, a nefarious intent? What does that mean? How could you do a mitzvah with a bad intent? We'll get to that. But that's the theme we're learning about today. What we're going to discover in this class as we wrap up the chapter is just how much the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman, the author of the Tanya, wants to impress upon us the importance that our Judaism should not be a dry Judaism. Judaism can't just be something that we do. It's not enough. You could even be the most religious Jew. You do everything. You walk the walk. You talk the talk. You're religious. You do every mitzvah. You don't do any sin. But that's not enough. Are you present? Are you present? Is God present in your life? That is something which is really the message that we're pulling out of this chapter, as we're going to see. Let's start learning. Page 308, part 4, when there is no kavanah. Here we go. But then, says the Alter Rebbe, but then you can have a Judaism that is not motivated by any fear and love. There's no emotions here. It doesn't even have any conscious emotional state of the mind. Even in your mind, you're not experiencing an emotion. Right? Sometimes you experience an emotion in your heart. That's very palpable. That's very real. Sometimes you can experience an emotion in your mind, which means I don't feel emotional, but I understand that this is an emotional experience. Right? It's different. My mind understands that this is a very important moment for me. So maybe my heart is not throbbing. My heart doesn't feel it right now, but my mind understands it. No kavanah means there's nothing. You're not feeling anything in your heart. You're not feeling anything in your mind. It's just happening. Continues the Alter Rebbe. What that means is that this person doing this mitzvah didn't even awaken the love that is already dormant in the heart. You've got love for God in your heart. He doesn't even work on bringing that out. Bringing it to light from its concealment, hidden in the heart, not even making it conscious as a consent in the mind, or the depths of the heart, at the very least. Rather, that love remains hidden in the heart, as it was at birth, in the same state as before your Torah study of mitzvahs. So here we have a Jew who's doing a mitzvah, studying Torah, but the fact that he's engaging in a mitzvah does not deepen his relationship with God. He has simply zero emotional investment. He has zero emotional presence in his Judaism. That's what we're describing over here. What happens then? Till now, the chapter was describing when a Jew has kavanah and how the mitzvah becomes an otherworldly experience. It ascends and it becomes a godly force of another world. What happens when there's no kavanah? Says the Alter Rebbe, in that case, when there's no kavanah, this Torah and mitzvahs will remain below in the world of separateness, known as the superficial dimension of the worlds. This Judaism does not have the power to rise and be absorbed in God's unity in the 10 holy Sephirot. What happens to this mitzvah is simply nothing. There is no spiritual effect that happens to this mitzvah. You had an unbelievable moment where it could have been so godly, so powerful, so holy, and there could have been this gush of godly energy, but you didn't activate it. You didn't activate it. And if you're not activating it, then it's a dud. A very strong force, but there's no liftoff. And that's what happens. You filled up your car with gas, and then you did a mitzvah. But the mitzvah didn't have anything to it more than filling up the gas. It's just another activity that you did in your life. So you want this moment to be more godly? It had tremendous potential to be more godly, but you didn't invest any kavanah into it. So it kind of stays exactly where it is. Nothing special happens there. Yes, Leah? You got to unmute.
But aren't we taught that maybe eventually it will reach a level? I mean, better to do it than not to do it?
Oh, that's a very good question. Does this mean that I should stop doing mitzvahs if I don't have kavanah? That's a very, very important, critical question. We're going to learn about that in a moment. But very, very important question. Right? You could learn this and get very, very downhearted and say, oh, I guess my whole Judaism isn't worth anything because I don't have kavanah. So we're going to be addressing that very, very shortly. Let's continue reading. As the Tikkunei Zohar teaches, that, quote, without reverence and love, a mitzvah will not fly upwards. It can't rise up and stand before God. Okay, now, what does it mean not having kavanah? Explains the Alter Rebbe. We're not speaking here of a Judaism that was completely inauthentic, performed for some ulterior motive, God forbid, other than serving God. We're not talking over here about somebody who's doing his Judaism for a bad, inauthentic reason. No, rather, we're simply speaking here, even of a case that there was simply a lack of emotional investment. As the verse puts it, page 309, their reverence of me is mitzvahs of people performed by rote, meaning that the Judaism is done out of habit, that the person has grown accustomed to from childhood, that his father and teacher trained and taught him to behave as one who reveres God and worships him. Very interesting. What's bad about this Judaism is not that you had a bad intent. It's that you had zero intent. And what does that mean? Why would a Jew do a mitzvah? Why would a Jew study Torah if he has no intent? And it's very, very simple. It's very easy to get into habit. We are creatures of habit, especially if you're born religious. Religious Jews suffer from this the most. You're born into a Jewish family. You're born into a practicing Jewish family. Your father and mother taught you from the youngest of ages, we're Jews, we do mitzvahs. You went to a yeshiva as a little boy, and you hear from your teacher that we are Jews, we do mitzvahs. We listen to God. God asks us to do something, we do it. God said, keep Shabbos and don't do these things at Shabbos. We don't do that. You could live your whole life like that. You could live your whole life saying, the way I was raised is, we don't do this. The problem here is that you can have a whole Judaism that's simply out of habit. People have a habit to go walking every morning around the block. Somebody else has a habit to do that. I don't know. Everybody has their own habits. So you got into habit for Judaism. But is that a relationship? It's not a relationship. So it's a beautiful thing that your human habits revolve around God's mitzvahs. It could have been around going fishing, and instead you have a habit to go pray in the morning. It's a beautiful habit. We're not saying it's a bad habit. What we're saying is even habits. What's a habit? A habit is simply you living your life. Is that a relationship? Is that you entering into a relationship with God? Is that you investing an emotional investment into your mitzvahs? No. So on the one hand, it's not inauthentic. It's not done for a bad purpose. But says the author, but there's no relationship here. Let's continue learning. But such a Judaism isn't genuinely authentic either. We can't call this authentic. Why? Because it's impossible for it to be a genuinely authentic unless the person, at the very least, arouses the innate fear and love to bring these emotions out of their concealment in the heart, to shine at least in the brain and in the depths of the heart. The Alter Rebbe says you need to stir up your emotions, at least a little bit. Then we could say you have kavanah. But you could be very religious. You could be doing a lot of mitzvahs. And it can be done out of habit. But that's not called that this is an authentic act for God. We can say that this is you entering into a relationship with God. It still is. Every mitzvah is entering into a relationship. But you're not investing that relationship here. And the author is going to give us an analogy. It's just like in any relationship. Let's continue learning. This is very, very deep over here. Because just as you wouldn't do something for your friend to fulfill his will unless you loved or revered him, likewise, it's impossible to do something authentically for God, to genuinely fulfill his will, without recalling or stirring your love and reverence of him at all. At the very least, in your brain and in the depths of your heart. Let's really chew this over. The Alter Rebbe says, let's first start with the analogy. The Alter Rebbe says it's impossible to do something for your friend. You wouldn't fulfill your friend's will unless you loved or revered him. Meaning, unless you had a relationship, an emotional relationship, you wouldn't do it. Is that true, by the way? Do you agree with this sentence, with this statement? Do you not do something for somebody else unless you love or respect them or revere them? Is that true? On the surface level, if you think about it, I don't know. I've done things for people that I don't care for them. I don't love them. What does that mean that we don't do something for somebody else unless we love them or revere them? What does that mean? Did you ever give somebody charity on somebody who needed? You gave them charity, but you didn't necessarily love them. You didn't necessarily revere them, but you did something for them. So what does that mean that you're not going to do something unless you love or revere them? And the answer is something very, very deep. You could, of course, give something to somebody. But the question is always going to be why? Why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? We don't really have it here in Detroit. But in Brooklyn, it's a very normal thing in Jewish communities to have beggars. But there are people. There are beggars. You could be davening in the shul one morning, and there'll be some Jews going around asking for handouts. So I'll give them $1. Why do I give them $1? It's a good Jewish thing to do, no? And you're supposed to give charity every single day, and you're supposed to give charity before you pray. So it's perfect. I'm here to pray. I see a beggar. I'll pull out $1. But am I doing that for him? The answer is no. Why am I doing it? Why am I giving this guy $1? Is it because I love this guy and I care about him? No. I'm actually doing it for myself. I have an obligation to give tzedakah. I want to do it now. You happen to be here. That's great. But this is not about you. And the proof is I can give this guy charity, and then I'll say, wow, this guy probably cares about me. He's giving me money. Let's stop and chat. And what will I tell him? I'm sorry. I'm not up to chatting. I don't want to talk to you. Of course, I'll say it nicely, right? Not in a rude way. That's very interesting. I just give the guy $1 and I don't want to talk to him. Why not? You see, we could do things for somebody else, but it's not really for them. It's really for other reasons. Maybe it's for myself. I'll give you another example. Like the way, like in families, you have this idea of like generational relationships. Like, we're friends with that family. Why are we friends with that family? Because their grandfather was neighbors with my grandmother, and because of that, it's family tradition that we like this other family. Right? You know what I'm talking about? And like parents teach your children, in our family, we take good care of those people. Like, we care about those people. Like, we have that. Like, my father will say, it's family tradition. We like this family. We take good care of this family. I don't even know why. I never even heard of this family. I never spoke to them. But in this family, this is what we do. You know what I'm talking about? The other version of it is that in our family, we hate those people. Right? Which happens all the time here in Detroit, right? Yeah, we go back many generations, our families don't get along. What do you mean our families don't get along? Did you ever talk to them? No, I don't talk to them. Why not? Because our families don't get along. Generational relationships. So, think about this over here. Parents tell their children, we really like this family, we take good care of this family. It's a family tradition. For 3 generations, we take good care of this family. Okay, I'm a good child, I'm a good son. Okay, so I joined the party line. They say we take good care, I'll do it. So I take good care of that family. We look out for them, we say hi to them, we're nice to them, we go out to the restaurants together, because this is tradition. We're nice to this family. Am I in an emotional relationship with that family? Even though I give them all these things? No. I'm actually in an emotional relationship with my own family. My family ethos is that we're nice to that family. So it's not about that family, it's about my family. Oh, my family says you got to be nice to them. You understand? So very often we are giving things to people, we're helping other people, but what's it for? It's not truly for the other one. It could be out of personal obligation. Sometimes we could say, I don't feel right. It feels wrong for me to not do this, so I need to do this. So you'll do something. But is it for the other one, or really it's for yourself? I'm doing it for me. I feel I need to do this, I'll do it. Nothing personal. It's not about you. It's I need to do this. Now let's bring this to God. Of course we're doing mitzvahs. You could do mitzvahs. You could even be religious. You could be doing every single mitzvah in the book and staying away from every single sin in the book. But is it for God? Why am I doing this? If it's for God, that means that you're in a relationship with God. I actually love God. That's why I'm doing this right now. It's an act of love. I revere God. I respect God. I'm now going to inconvenience my life because I have so much respect for God. But if you don't have that real emotional presence, even if you're doing a lot of mitzvahs, it's possible that you're doing it for every other reason in the book besides for God. You could be doing it for yourself. I want to be a good person. And what does a good person mean for a Jew? You got to do mitzvahs. Oh, so I need to be a good person. 1 second, then it's not for God. You're doing it for yourself. Or the guy who has a Judaism by nurture. He was born into a family that is very religious, does all the mitzvahs, keeps Shabbos. Why do we keep Shabbos? I don't know. This is what we always do. This is what we do as Jews. This is how I was raised. So then why are you keeping Shabbos? Is it for God or is it for your education? Or is it for your habit? Or like people say, I'm going to be very careful about this mitzvah because I want my children to see what a committed Jew looks like. So that's beautiful. But then it's not for God. It's for your children. Now, I'm not saying that any of these reasons are bad, and none of these invalidate the mitzvah. It's still a good thing you did the mitzvah. And to Leah's point, and I'm foreshadowing, we're going to learn about this in a moment, even if you don't have a good kavanah, you should still do the mitzvah. We're not saying that these are bad mitzvahs. A mitzvah is always good. But we have to demand of ourselves that not just we're doing a mitzvah, but that we're doing it with the right presence of mind. I'm actually doing it for God. And if we don't have that, the Alter Rebbe says it's a good mitzvah, but it's lacking the energy to really make this mitzvah shine and soar. This is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. A Jew needs to be in a real emotional relationship with God, at least on some level. At least on some level. Let's continue learning. One more paragraph for this little point. Page 309. And also, says the Alter Rebbe, and also, love alone, without at least a basic or lower reverence, is not called real service. And this lower reverence is latent in the heart of every Jew, as will be explained below. The Alter Rebbe also says you need to have both emotions. Just love is not enough. You need to have love and fear, love and reverence, love and respect. And we're going to get to that later on. Well, this is what the Alter is saying over here. Real kavanah means I'm doing this for God. I'm emotionally present over here. Okay, this was part number 1. Now we have part number 2. What happens when you do a mitzvah? And it's even worse. Not only you don't have kavanah, but you're doing it for a bad reason. What's a bad reason? Let's read. Bottom of page 309. And then we have a Judaism that is completely inauthentic, meaning it's performed for some self-serving ulterior motive. You're engaging in Judaism, but you're not doing it for Judaism. You're actually misappropriating Judaism. You're using Judaism out for your own ulterior motives. That's pretty nasty, no? We don't like when people use us out, but it happens. People use Judaism out. What does that mean? Let's read. For example, here's an example. A person studies Torah, but not to serve God, but to become celebrated as a Torah scholar, or something like that. A Jew studies Torah. Why am I studying Torah? Not because this is God's Torah and God wants to be in a relationship with me, and this is how I get to be in a relationship with God. No, this Jew does it because I want to be smart, and I want people to look up to me, and I want to be a respected person in the community. So I'm going to be a Torah scholar. What you're doing now is you're taking Torah that's so holy and so pure, and you're using it out for your own purposes. It's a little bit of a form of abuse. God gave us a Torah like that. He could be in a relationship with us. And now you're going to use out that gift for your own purposes, just to stoke your own ego? Okay, and again, somebody does a mitzvah. You know why I'm doing this mitzvah? Because it feels so good. Wow. That's a misappropriation of the mitzvah. You're doing the mitzvah not for God, not for no reason, but because it makes you feel good? Since when was mitzvahs here to make you feel good? That's called a bad kavanah. It's a misappropriation. This became about you? This became about your pleasure? This is also, it's a very common trap. Instead of us serving God, we ask God to serve us. We ask Judaism to serve us. Judaism make me feel good. Judaism, I'm not going to do that right now. It doesn't make me feel good. What? Since when was this about us feeling good? This doesn't give me satisfaction. This doesn't give me fulfillment. I'm not going to do it. That's the wrong direction. That's horrible kavanah. We're here to serve Judaism. We're here to serve God. We're here to be God's messengers, God's agents, to carry out His wishes, His will, His plan. Now it became about us? That's horrible. They say the story, there was once a Jew, and he convinced himself that he's a very holy spiritual Jew. And he would go home and pray for hours at a time, and he convinced himself that he's getting through these very deep spiritual experiences. And then he started hearing that while he's at home praying, he hears a lot of commotion outside the door. And he assumed, what's all the noise? That people from the community discovered that he's such a spiritual, holy person. And there's a whole bunch of people outside clamoring to listen into how he prays. And that made him feel so good. See, he prayed even louder and with even more, he got all into his praise. Now people are listening. And this would go on for days, and every single day he would pray, and he would hear noise outside, and he would feel so good about himself. He's got a crowd, and he's being recognized that he's so spiritual. And every time he heard people, it gave him even more energy to engage more in his spirituality and his davening. And one day something sounded off. He went outside to go check what's going on, and he realized that it wasn't people. There was just a family of cats that lived right outside of his house. And they were... See, he was davening for the cats. This is called negative kavanah. It's not for God. And it's not even that you're in a habit, so you're not even conscious of God. It's that you have a bad consciousness here. You have bad thoughts. And bad thoughts is that you're using Judaism out. Then it gets even worse. When there's no kavanah, the mitzvah just stays right where it is. Just zero. Didn't go up, didn't go down. Over here, because you are investing an ulterior motive, you're investing your own interests, you're investing your own ego into the mitzvah, into the Torah study, it traps the Torah study. Now the mitzvah gets trapped. Let's read. Page 310. Then the ulterior motive, which is from klipas noga, now it's klipa, now this mitzvah is being powered by your ego, by klipa, then that klipa becomes enmeshed with your Torah, and the Torah becomes temporarily exiled in the klipa. The Torah is good, the mitzvah is good, but it gets trapped in this really bad environment of klipa. But the Alter says only temporarily. Why? That is, until you do teshuvah. You repent, you get back on board with God, which releases you from the klipa, and it brings healing to the world. So when you return to God, your Torah goes up with you. This is a beautiful state. Yeah, you could misappropriate Judaism, and you could make your Jewish life all about your ego and about klipa. But then you do tshuva. And when you go back to God, you also uplift your whole life. When you do tshuva, you're shedding off the layer of klipa. You're freeing yourself from klipa. And when you free yourself from klipa, you free your whole life from klipa. And all that Judaism that you did for the wrong reasons, now that Judaism could go back up. It could go up with you. And now those mitzvahs could shine. So here you're seeing, and this is starting to answer Leah's question. Even when a mitzvah is not done originally, correctly, but it could always be fixed. Retroactively, you could always fix it. And here the Alter addresses this exact question. Now we see that even if you're doing a mitzvah for the bad reason, it's still a good idea because you could always go back and fix it. Says the Alter Rebbe, that's the reason that our sages taught. This is what it says in the Talmud. Quote, a person should always engage in Torah study and mitzvahs, even inauthentically. For out of doing it inauthentically, he will certainly come to do it authentically. A Judaism done for the bad of reasons is still better than no Judaism. Because if you have no Judaism, you can't ever fix that. If you didn't light Shabbos candles one week, it's over. You can't go back and fix that. That week is gone. That Friday afternoon will never come back in human history. It's gone. So you got to have a mitzvah. Whether you have kavanah, whether you have a bad kavanah, it doesn't matter. You got to do it. Even if it's done for the bad reasons. But once the mitzvah is done, you could always release the power of the mitzvah and give it lift even after the fact. And that's where our sages say, always do the mitzvah even if it's for a bad reason. And says the Alter Rebbe, this is such a powerful paragraph. For it is a certainty that you will eventually do teshuvah. It is impossible that a Jew will do a mitzvah and won't at some point do teshuvah, which allows that mitzvah to have redemption and to go back up. A person will definitely do teshuvah, either in this incarnation or another, or at a later period in your life. For a banished person will not remain banished from him. Very, very powerful. Somebody who's distant from God, somebody who's banished from God, God doesn't allow that to stay permanent. Somebody could be far from God. God's not going to allow that to stay for long. And our sages say, every person guaranteed will ultimately do teshuvah. When? Either in this lifetime or in a different lifetime. That's what we say, incarnation. It could happen in a different lifetime. Or it can even happen at a different phase in your life. Sometimes people go through an experience in life that is like a bit of like a reset, a little bit of an upset, a little bit of a disturbance that disturbs their life, and they enter into a new phase of life, and they could do tshuva. When you do tshuva, not only are you getting close to God from now and on, but you're lifting your whole past life. And any mitzvah that you've done before for bad reasons now gets to shine through your teshuvah. Very powerful. But, says the Alter Rebbe, but if your Judaism is neutral, which is the opening case, that it's neither inauthentic nor authentic, right? You both didn't have kavanah, but you also didn't have a bad kavanah. Okay, so then, says the Alter Rebbe, for your Torah and mitzvahs to be elevated to God is far easier. You don't need to release it from klipa. And it doesn't depend on teshuvah, but rather, as soon as you go back and learn that this Torah with an authentic intent, then the thing that you learned with neutral intent will join with the current authentic study, and it will fly upwards together. Very powerful, very, very interesting what's happening over here. The Alter says this is the way it works. If you do a mitzvah with bad kavanah, then you need to do teshuvah. But let's say you did a mitzvah with no kavanah. I lit Shabbos candles, and I do it out of habit, and I didn't think anything. I put on tefillin because I put on tefillin once a week, and I didn't think anything. I did it out of habit. The Alter Rebbe says, okay, that mitzvah that you did out of habit with no kavanah, there's no lift. Nothing happens to it. It's not given an opportunity to shine and to go up. But, says the Alter Rebbe, the moment that you ever re-engage with that mitzvah and you do it with a good kavanah, then this mitzvah that has a good kavanah brings along with it all the mitzvahs that you've done, this mitzvah that you've done in the past, that need to get lift. And in this way, even if there's a mitzvah that didn't get the chance to go up, it's relatively easy. The next time you engage with that mitzvah, but with kavanah, or the next time you engage with that same piece of Torah study, but with proper kavanah, it uplifts everything. The Alter Rebbe says, bottom page 310, this neutral study can rise upward much easier, since it had not yet become enmeshed with any klipas noga. So it doesn't require tshuva to release it. Okay, so this is much easier if it's just neutral with no bad kavanah but no good kavanah. And concludes the Alter Rebbe, page 311, and that's why, quote, A person should always engage in Torah study and mitzvahs, etc., even if it won't be done with the proper kavanah. There you have it. Because retroactively you could always rescue this Torah and mitzvahs, even if there's no good kavanah, still do it. And one last line, and the same is true of prayer without kavanah. You simply have to pray again with concentration, and all your earlier prayers that were devoid of concentration will be elevated too, as stated in the Zohar. So here we conclude this very technical chapter, where the author is walking us through different levels of kavanah, showing us this premise about how kavanah gives tremendous lift to the mitzvah, allowing the mitzvah to shine. And then the author concluded what happens when there's no kavanah, but even then it's still redeemable. And really, what the author wants to show us is that kavanah is a very integral part of Judaism. It's so important to do mitzvahs, and there's no question that's the most important thing. That's ground zero. You got to do a mitzvah, you got to study the Torah, and you got to pray. That's where it's at. But once you have a mitzvah, we need to demand of ourselves that there should be a relationship. That God is not just an abstraction. That my Judaism is not just something that I do out of tradition, right? The word tradition is a treif word. It's a bad word. Tradition. Tradition means it's something I don't care about, but this is something that's always been done. You know what tradition is? The royal family of England, they have traditions. When they drink a cup of tea, there's a way to hold the cup of tea. Not because it makes a difference to anybody, but because this is tradition. For hundreds of years, this is how the royal family would drink a cup of tea. In other words, tradition means it's meaningless. Tradition means I do this for no other reason, but because just tradition. It's a shtick. The author is saying we need to make our Judaism a lot more real. Why am I doing this? For whom am I doing this? And this is something which is beyond the technicalities of this chapter. It's so critical and so meaningful. And this is something the author is showing us just how important it is that we have this emotional presence. I want to conclude with a little thought, and then we'll wrap up for today. A few years ago, I had there was a guy my age actually, who's not Chabad. He's religious, not Chabad. He lives right here in Oak Park. And he was very intrigued by the Tanya, by the world of Chabad, Hasidic thought. This is a religious boy, knows a lot of Torah. As they say, he's frum. And he asked me, what does Hasidus bring to the table? What's unique that Hasidus is giving the Jewish people that without Hasidus you wouldn't have this? Without the Tanya you wouldn't have this? It was an interesting challenge. How do I capture, in a quick elevator pitch, what is something that Hasidus has, that Tanya has, that if you look at the whole Jewish library from 3,300 years, this is something that really changes what Jewish life looks like. And what I told him was like this. I said, this was what came to mind right away. I told him, I said, I want to ask you a question. And I want you to trust me that I'm not asking this question out of spite. Just give me an honest answer to this question, I told him. I said, you're part of what they call the Litvish Jewish community, the non-Chabad, the non-Hasidic community. How often would you say that men your age, young professionals, young dads raising a family, how often would you say woman the age of your wife? Orthodox Jewish woman. How often teenage boys, teenage girls, yeshiva boys, high school girls? How often are they really asking questions? And these are all Jews that are 100% religious. They pray 3 times a day, keep Shabbos to the T, every single mitzvah, right? Living the top observant Jewish lifestyle. I said, how often would you say in your community are all these different demographics asking themselves the hard questions such as, what is God? What does God mean to me? What does God think about me? What's God's relationship with me? What's my relationship with God? What do I think about Torah? Why am I studying Torah? Why am I doing mitzvahs? How often would you say, these are questions that people ask themselves, which are really very deep questions. They get right down to the core of a Jewish lifestyle. Why am I doing this? He says, you know what? Honestly, probably never, or hardly ever. I said, I think that's what Chassidus, that's the power of Chassidus. That Chassidus is taking Judaism. You could be religious without Chassidus, without Tanya. You could be doing a lot of mitzvahs without Tanya. But this idea that you are entering into a relationship with God, that you're forcing yourself to say, I'm not just doing Judaism, but I want to do it for God. What do I think about God? And I want to arouse some of that emotion within me. I want to feel something about God. I want to feel something about Judaism. I want to feel something about my Jewish life. That's something very, very powerful. That the Tanya, you see, the Alter Rebbe really wants us to have that. And that will be my takeaway for this chapter. Dear friends, chapter 39 is in the books. We are entering into the 40s. Next, we're going to learn chapter 40. Chapter 40 wraps up this subject. It'll take us a little bit quicker to go through, hopefully 3 classes at max. And then chapter 41 is a brand new subject, all about different meditations for different emotions. So chapter 41 will be a brand new, building off of this premise that there needs to be emotions, but how do you make those emotions? That's when we'll start learning in chapter 41. All right, dear friends, l'chaim, l'chaim. Thank you all for joining, and if you have any thoughts, any questions, let's do it.
So I always have questions.
Go for it, Leah. Yes, it's good. I would be bored over here if not for your questions.
So what this makes me think of? The tzaddik and the Baal Teshuva. The tzaddik, has done this all their life, perhaps. And the Baal Teshuva, it's coming back. And it seems like, or even a convert, that there's got to be that Kabbalah, I would think, because it's a different road, a different path. And
the Baal Teshuva in Judaism is understood as somebody who has a very deep relationship with God, and somebody who is always perfect and never had that experience of distance, and then rekindling that relationship, will never get to the relationship that a Baal Teshuva has with God. And if I'm understanding you correctly, Leah, I think that's what your point is over here.
yeah.
They had to earn it. They had to ask these hard questions. If you never had to face these questions, then it's you got to stale Judaism. Unless you make yourself into a Baal Teshuva, make yourself somebody who owns their Judaism, discovers it on their own.